Sarah Jensen's morning had barely started when the radio in her Forest Service truck crackled to life. The urgency in the dispatcher's voice cut through the serene backdrop of Glacier National Park like a knife. "Sarah, you copy. This is Mike at dispatch." Her response was swift, fingers pausing their idle dance on the steering wheel. "Copy, Mike. What's up?" "We've got multiple reports of unusual bear activity near Thompson Creek. Johnson family called it in. They were hiking the lower trail when they heard what they described as distressed bear sounds. Might want to check it out." Sarah's grip tightened on the wheel as the truck bumped along the rugged path. The season's unseasonable rains had transformed the landscape into a lush tapestry, but also hinted at potential dangers, like flooding in the lower valleys that could provoke unpredictable wildlife behavior. "Any visual confirmation of cubs?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the concern that tightened her chest. "Negative, but given the time of year..." Mike's voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air like the mist that clung to the mountain peaks. "Say no more. I'm about 15 minutes out." Ending the call, Sarah's mind raced. Spring meant newborn wildlife, and in the case of bears, protective mothers. Her 23 years as a wildlife biologist had honed her instincts. Something about today felt ominously different. Accelerating past a curve, she neared Thompson Creek, the urgency building with every mile. The spring had been particularly wet, feeding the creeks until they swelled dangerously. From her truck, Sarah could see the rapid water churning aggressively, carrying debris and branches in its furious flow. As she pulled over at the designated ranger spot, Sarah quickly gathered her essential gear: binoculars, tranquilizer kit, radio, and the small notebook filled with years of observations and sketches. Each item was a familiar weight in her hands, comforting against the backdrop of the unknown situation unfolding. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, Sarah's trained eyes immediately sought out the source of the disturbance. Through her binoculars, the scene that unfolded made her heart lurch. A female grizzly, massive and agitated, paced frantically by the water's edge. Even from this distance, the bear's desperation was palpable, her powerful body coiled with maternal anxiety. Zooming in, Sarah's breath caught as she spotted the cause of the grizzly's distress. On a small island of debris in the middle of the rushing creek, two tiny cubs clung precariously amongst the branches, their cries nearly drowned out by the roar of the water. The stakes were clear. Without intervention, the cubs wouldn't last long. The sight of the cubs steeled her resolve as she radioed in her findings. "Mike, this is Sarah. We've got a situation here. Mother grizzly, two cubs trapped on debris in Thompson Creek. The water's rising fast. We need immediate assistance." Acknowledging her report, Mike's voice was grim. "Emergency response is 40 minutes out. Fish and Wildlife has been notified." 40 minutes might as well have been an eternity. As Sarah watched the bear's futile attempts to reach her offspring, a mixture of determination and dread settled over her. The mother bear's mournful bellow echoed off the mountains, a primal call of distress that Sarah felt in her bones. At that moment, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors sliced through the morning stillness, a harbinger of the escalating situation. Sarah's heart sank further. Helicopter activity usually meant serious trouble, especially during cub season. With no time to waste, Sarah prepared to do whatever it took to keep the situation from spiraling into tragedy. As she finalized her approach, the sight of an approaching vehicle caught her attention, a pickup truck familiar to the local roads. It was Joe Martinez, a seasoned fishing guide known in these parts for both his expertise and his headstrong nature. His arrival could change everything, but as Sarah watched him step out with determined eyes, she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Joe Martinez pulled up beside Sarah's Forest Service vehicle with the quiet confidence of a man who had lived in the mountains for decades. His presence was as reassuring as it was unexpected. He exited his truck, his movements deliberate despite the urgency of the situation, and approached Sarah. "The water's risen faster than I've seen in years," Joe remarked, eyeing the swollen creek with a seasoned gaze. His voice carried over the sound of rushing water, tinged with concern but underscored by a trace of resolve. Sarah nodded, her focus on the creek where the grizzly and her cubs were trapped. The debris island was a fragile sanctuary in the middle of churning waters that threatened to sweep it away at any moment. "Those cubs are in a bad spot," she said, adjusting her binoculars for a better view. "We need to act quickly." The creek, fed by the recent rains, had transformed from a tranquil body of water into a dangerous torrent. The banks, usually welcoming with soft grasses and wildflowers, now bordered a maelstrom that pulled at the roots of trees and swallowed anything unlucky enough to fall into its grasp. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see the bear's muscles tense as she paced back and forth, her large frame casting a shadow that danced wildly with the flickering light of the morning sun filtering through the dense canopy above. Every few moments, the mother bear tested the water's edge, her instincts to protect clashing with the reality of the perilous currents. Her deep, guttural roars filled the air, a soundtrack of desperation that resonated in the crisp morning air. The cubs, meanwhile, huddled together, their small forms a stark contrast to their mother's imposing figure. They whimpered softly, their cries almost drowned out by the cacophony of the creek's rage. Sarah assessed the scene, her mind racing through potential rescue scenarios. "The debris won't hold much longer at this rate," she muttered, mostly to herself, but Joe caught the words as he joined her side, following her gaze to the imperiled cubs. "We might have a window here before the next rain," Joe suggested, squinting against the light as he surveyed the creek. "If we can create a diversion, it might give us a chance to get to them." The idea sparked a flicker of hope in Sarah. Diversion was risky, but it might be their only chance to save the cubs without endangering the mother bear or themselves. She turned to Joe, about to respond, when the sudden sound of snapping branches from the direction of the debris island cut her off. Both whipped their heads around just in time to see part of the island give way, sending a spray of twigs and leaves into the air. The cubs squealed, their fear palpable even from a distance. The mother bear let out a roar that seemed to shake the leaves on the trees, her anxiety reaching a fever pitch as she watched helplessly. "Time's running out," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We need to make a move now." Joe nodded, his face set in a grim line. "I've got my boat in the back. It's small, but it's sturdy enough to handle this current. I'll get it ready." As Joe hurried back to his truck to prepare the boat, Sarah used her radio to call in additional support. The risks were high, but the stakes were even higher. She couldn't and wouldn't let those cubs drown without trying everything possible to save them. Watching Joe's preparations, Sarah felt a mixture of dread and determination. This was it. They were about to attempt a rescue that would require precision, luck, and a whole lot of courage. As Joe's boat slid into the water, Sarah's resolve hardened. Whatever it took, they were going to save those cubs. Joe's hands moved with practiced ease as he prepared the small inflatable boat, the kind used for fly fishing on calmer waters, not typically suited for rapid torrents like the swollen creek. Yet, his confidence in its capabilities was evident. Lashing a sturdy rope to the bow, he checked the integrity of every knot and seam, ensuring it would hold against the force of the rushing water. Sarah watched him, her anxiety tempered by the sight of Joe's methodical preparations. His experience as a fishing guide in these unpredictable mountain waters was invaluable, and his calm demeanor belied the urgency of the situation. "Think it'll hold up?" she asked, her voice betraying her concern as she glanced back at the creek where the cubs were growing increasingly restless. "It's held up against worse," Joe replied, without looking up. "Just need to make sure everything's secure. Can't afford any mistakes, not with lives at stake." His voice was firm, reflecting a resolve forged by years of navigating the treacherous mountain environment. With the boat ready, Joe turned to Sarah, squinting against the low morning sun that filtered through the towering pines. "Once I'm on the water, keep an eye on the mother bear. If she gets too close or agitated, you'll need to distract her. Can't have her swimming after us." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of her role in the rescue. The safety of the cubs depended not only on Jo's ability to navigate the fierce currents, but also on her ability to manage the mother bear's natural instincts to protect her young. "I'll use the tranquilizer if I have to," Sarah said, gripping the dart gun a little tighter. "But only as a last resort." Jo gave a brief nod, his gaze steady. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Ready?" "Ready?" With a deep breath, Jo pushed the boat into the creek. The water grasped it immediately, tugging it towards the center where the current was strongest. Jo jumped in, grabbing the oars with a sure grip. He looked back at Sarah, giving her a reassuring nod before turning his attention to the treacherous path ahead. Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the boat as it bobbed and swayed, making slow but steady progress towards the debris island. The cubs, sensing the movement, let out a series of high-pitched cries, their small bodies trembling with cold and fear. Above the roar of the creek, the mother bear paced more frantically, her roars deep and resonant. Just as Jo neared the halfway point, the debris under the cubs shifted ominously, sending a spray of water and branches into the air. Jo's oars dipped vigorously into the water, his efforts redoubling as he fought to reach the cubs before their precarious refuge was swept away entirely. As Jo maneuvered the inflatable closer to the debris island, the waters around him churned violently, whipped into a frenzy by the recent downpours. Each stroke of the oars was a battle against the pull of the current, which seemed intent on dragging him away from his target. Spray from the rapids misted the air, soaking him through, but his focus never wavered. Above the roar of the creek, Sarah's voice crackled through the radio clipped to Jo's life vest. "You're almost there, Jo. Just a bit further." Her words were meant to encourage, but they were barely audible over the tumult of nature's chaos. On the debris island, the cubs huddled together, their whimpers growing louder as the water lapped at their makeshift refuge. The island itself, a fragile assembly of branches and mud, trembled under the force of the water, pieces of it breaking away even as Jo drew nearer. The mother bear, witnessing the approach, roared with a mix of fear and warning. She paced the riverbank, her eyes locked on the small boat bobbing dangerously close to her cubs. The raw power of her presence was palpable, even from a distance. Just as Jo reached out with his oar to steady the boat against the current, a large wave surged, catching him off guard. The boat tilted precariously, water spilling over the side, and for a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though it would capsize. "Jo, watch out!" Sarah's shout was desperate, her finger on the trigger of the tranquilizer gun, ready to intervene if the bear made a move towards him. Regaining control, Jo steadied the boat with a practiced pull of the oars, his arms straining against the weight of the water. The boat righted itself, but the close call had shaved precious seconds off his window of opportunity. With the island disintegrating rapidly, Jo knew he had to act fast. Gathering his resolve, he prepared to make a final push towards the cubs, hoping to reach them before the relentless river could claim their fragile sanctuary. With Jo's initial attempt nearly ending in disaster, the arrival of Tom Running Wolf at the scene was timely. As Jo paddled back to shore to regroup, Tom pulled his old Jeep up to the water's edge, its sides plastered with bumper stickers that spoke of a lifetime spent in the wilderness. Stepping out, he carried several lengths of rope and a demeanor that mixed urgency with an inexplicable calm. Tom, a member of the local Blackfeet tribe and a seasoned wildlife collaborator, had been working with the Park Service on integrating traditional ecological knowledge into modern conservation practices. His approach often involved methods passed down through generations, methods that respected the natural order and sought harmony rather than control. As Sarah watched, Tom surveyed the scene with a critical eye, then began setting up a complex system of ropes anchored to trees along the bank. His movements were deliberate, each knot tied with precision and confidence. "These ropes will help guide the boat back if the current gets too strong," Tom explained to Sarah, who had joined him to assist. "The spirits of the water are restless today," Tom mentioned quietly as he worked, his voice barely audible over the rush of the creek. "We must show respect if we are to ask for their help." Sarah nodded, understanding that Tom's reference to the spirits was part of his worldview, one that saw humans as part of a larger ecosystem, each element deserving respect. As Tom prepared the rope system, Joe prepared for a second attempt. This time, the boat would be tethered, giving him a lifeline back to shore. Sarah's role was to monitor the mother bear, her tranquilizer gun at the ready, though she hoped not to use it. Once Tom finished setting up the ropes, he paused to speak a few words in his native language, a prayer, or perhaps a plea to the spirits he believed watched over their valley. Then he turned to Sarah and Joe with a nod, signaling that they were ready to proceed. Joe launched the boat again, this time with the added security of the ropes. As he paddled towards the cubs, Tom held onto the other end, ready to adjust the tension and guide Joe's path through the most treacherous parts of the current. The mother bear's anxiety had escalated, her roars more frequent and filled with a palpable fear. Tom noticed her distress and, putting aside the ropes for a moment, walked a few steps closer to the water's edge. "We are here to help, not harm," he said softly in English, though his message seemed intended for more than just human ears. His presence seemed to have a calming effect. The bear, while still visibly agitated, paused in her pacing. Her eyes, full of primal fear, watched Tom's movements closely. It was as if a silent understanding was forming between them, bridged by Tom's respect and the sincerity of his actions. With Tom's steady hand on the rope and his words lingering in the air, Joe reached the debris island. The cubs, now visibly weaker but still alive, seemed to sense the rescue was imminent. They stirred, their small voices mingling with the sound of the rushing water. Tom's intervention had brought a moment of peace, a brief respite in the chaos of the rescue. As Joe scooped the cubs into the boat, the mother bear's roars softened, replaced by a tense silence. Everyone on the shore held their breath, watching as Joe, guided by Tom's expert handling of the ropes, began the delicate journey back to safety. The second attempt, steeped in the traditions of the land and the people who knew it best, was underway. As Joe carefully maneuvered the boat towards the shore, the cubs nestled within, their small bodies shivering from fear and cold. The tension was palpable among the rescue team, each member acutely aware that the most dangerous part of the mission still loomed, the mother bear's potential reaction to Joe bringing her cubs ashore. The waters calmed slightly as Tom expertly managed the rope system, guiding Joe through the less turbulent patches. His deep understanding of the river's moods was evident in each pull and release of the ropes, his actions in perfect sync with Joe's careful navigation. Sarah watched from the shore, her tranquilizer gun still in hand, though her finger was far from the trigger. Her eyes were fixed not only on Joe and the cubs, but also on the mother bear, who had ceased her agitated pacing and now stood almost statuesque at the water's edge. The bear's intense gaze followed every movement of the boat, her body tensed as if ready to pounce, yet restrained by an unfamiliar uncertainty. The boat finally touched the gravelly shore, and Joe wasted no time. He gently lifted the net, holding the cubs, and stepped out, his boots crunching on the wet stones. As he carried the cubs toward their mother, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment of truth. The mother bear's reaction was unlike anything Sarah had expected. Instead of the feared aggression, a palpable relief seemed to wash over the large creature. Her stance softened, her eyes following Joe's every step with what appeared to be gratitude rather than hostility. "Easy there, Big Mama," Joe murmured soothingly as he set the cubs down a safe distance from the mother bear. The cubs, recognizing their mother, scrambled toward her, their small cries now filled with excitement rather than fear. The reunion was a poignant scene. The mother bear enveloped her cubs in a protective embrace, sniffing them thoroughly, reassuring herself and them of their safety. Her large head then turned towards the rescuers, her eyes locking with Sarah's. In that gaze, Sarah saw something profound, a recognition and an acknowledgement that transcended the usual boundaries between wild animal and human. "It's like she understands we were here to help," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her voice carried a mix of wonder and newfound respect for the creature before her. Joe, stepping back, nodded in agreement. "Sometimes they just know," he said, his voice reflecting a reverence that matched Sarah's. The mother bear, her cubs now safely by her side, gave one last look towards the humans who had saved her offspring. In a gesture that would remain etched in Sarah's memory, the bear dipped her head slightly, almost like a nod of gratitude, before turning and leading her cubs back towards the forest. This simple, silent exchange marked a profound moment of connection between species, a reminder of the deep, often unspoken understanding that can exist in the natural world. As the bear disappeared into the thicket with her cubs, Sarah felt a shift in her own perceptions, a deepening of her commitment to these magnificent creatures and the wild spaces they inhabited. As the mother bear and her cubs disappeared into the dense underbrush of Glacier National Park, Sarah stood silently on the riverbank, her eyes tracing their path long after they were out of sight. The tranquility of the forest seemed to settle back in around her, the dramatic tension of the rescue dissipating with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant call of a hawk overhead. Joe and Tom began to pack up the equipment, their movements slow and reflective, each man lost in his thoughts about the morning's events. Sarah turned to them, her expression thoughtful. "What happened here today? It's going to change how I do things," she confessed, the weight of her words hanging between them. Tom nodded, his face creased with the wisdom of someone who had lived a life deeply entwined with the natural world. "It's moments like these that remind us why we do what we do," he said, his voice low but clear. "It's not just about managing wildlife, it's about understanding them, respecting them." Joe looked at Sarah, a slight smile breaking through his usually stoic demeanor. "You handled it well, Sarah. We both saw today that there's a balance to be struck between our human impulses and the needs of these creatures." Sarah's mind replayed the rescue, focusing on the moment the bear acknowledged their help. It was an interaction that defied simple scientific explanation, a profound connection that challenged the conventional boundaries of wildlife management. Inspired by this, Sarah began to consider new approaches to her work, ideas that incorporated not just biological science, but also the traditional ecological knowledge that Tom practiced, an integration that could redefine conservation efforts in the park. The impact of today's rescue extended beyond the immediate safety of the bear cubs. Back at the ranger station, Sarah documented the incident in detail, her report emphasizing the effectiveness of combining modern conservation techniques with traditional knowledge. Her suggestions included more collaborative initiatives with local tribes and community members, recognizing their invaluable insights into the region's ecology. In the weeks that followed, Sarah organized meetings with park officials and tribal leaders, presenting her findings and advocating for a more inclusive approach to wildlife management. The story of the rescue, particularly the bear's unusual gesture of thanks, resonated deeply, sparking a broader discussion about the emotional and cognitive capacities of wildlife. As new policies began to take shape, integrating more of Tom's traditional practices and expanding the training for rangers to include cultural and ecological sensitivity, Sarah found herself at the forefront of a subtle but significant shift in how people viewed and interacted with the natural world around them. One evening, standing on the banks of Thompson Creek, where the rescue had taken place, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The water flowed quietly now, the chaos of that day a stark contrast to the current calm. She thought about the mother bear and her cubs, hoping they were thriving somewhere deep in the forest. "It's all connected, isn't it?" she murmured to herself, the realization dawning anew. The interdependence of all life forms, the shared habitat, and the collective well-being were not just concepts to be taught, but realities to be lived and respected. As the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the creek, Sarah felt a renewed commitment to her role as a steward of this land. With each decision, each policy revised or introduced, she knew she was contributing to a legacy that honoured not only the science of wildlife management, but also the deeper, often mystical connection between humans and nature. This understanding, fostered by a desperate bear's fight to save her cubs, had indeed led to something unexpected. A transformation in how humans and wildlife could coexist, underpinned by mutual respect and a profound acknowledgement of their intertwined fates. As the evening shadows lengthened across Thompson Creek, bringing an end to another day in Glacier National Park, Sarah stood reflecting on the lessons learned and the lives touched. The bonds formed during the rescue weren't just between those present, but extended out to each of you watching this story unfold. It's a poignant reminder of the delicate dance between humanity and nature and the profound impacts of compassion and understanding. We hope this story resonates with you as much as it did with us. If it touched your heart, please like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think we can all contribute to better understanding and protecting the wildlife around us? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where we explore the deep connections that shape our world. Together, let's make a difference, one story at a time.